Hello, Internet land. Good morning and welcome. We're just going to give it a little bit of time before we get started as we wait for Instagram. Oh, I can spend this time telling you a story about how last week we waited for Instagram because we're so polite and kind and we want Instagram to show up. And then as soon as it was started, we jumped into our live stream and I forgot to actually hit the go live button on Instagram. So while we kindly waited and hung out in line for our throngs of person on Instagram to come and watch, we ended up not even going live on that channel because
That's
I
all
don't know
right.
why.
We live and we learn.
We live and we learn. Yeah. So this week I'm definitely going to push the button. I'm watching it like a hawk, and we're just waiting for the stream to connect. Oh, actually, I just realized I never posted the stream key in this time. So it's going to be next week. So everyone just tell your friends, don't go to Instagram this week. We have to just start. I just realized I messed up a piece earlier in the chain. So good morning and
Good morning,
welcome
Brian.
to People Being Imperfect and Learning in Public on the Hot Mess Life Coach, aptly named because I'm your host, Brian Hogan, clearly a hot mess. And also, I happen to be a life coach. Believe me, I really am. It's true. I actually make money at it. It's a true
He's a
story.
great
People
coach.
come to me for wisdom. Okay, it's true. Not technological advice, though. But anyway, this is the show for people trying to get it together while the world seems to be falling apart. And maybe I'm falling apart a little bit over here. We are going to continue our conversation today about dissolving core fears. And specifically, we're going to push in further into hope and how hope can operate as a vehicle to counteract the effects of fear so you can move through fear more effectively. Good morning, Mo. Welcome.
Good morning, Brian. I'm excited to chat.
Yes, me too. So I'll start with the definition of the word antidote. Last week, we got the definition of fear already, or hope rather. And this week, as we were doing the research, a theme that came up for me is how hope does not displace fear in your system, but rather hope allows you to interact differently with your fear so that you can move forward. So this is the definition of an antidote: a remedy or other agent used to neutralize or counteract the effects of a poison. So not the poison itself. The poison you might still have in your system, but the effects of that poison are addressed. This is how hope works with fear. You can have them side by side, but when hope is present, the effects of the fear are counteracted a bit. They're neutralized a little bit. So you have room to act from a place of clarity, not just a place of fear.
Yeah. Okay. So just to clarify a little bit, what are the effects of fear when we are experiencing a fear in our lives, regardless of what type? We've talked about several of them, in this season so far. What are the effects of being in a state of fear?
Yeah, so right. So there's physiological effects, chemical effects, emotional effects. The
Mhm.
the main one that the sort of physiological thing that comes to mind for me that's happening in our body when we're in fear is the nervous system switching from parasympathetic rest and digest, everything's chill and I love life and harmony, into the other one, which is like fight,
Sympathetic.
thank you, fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, like all of those F's. And so fear is causing, maybe a racing heart or sweaty skin, cloudy judgment. Like you talked about it in, I think it was episode 3 or 4 of this season, about how it actually pulls the blood out of the parts of your brain that help you think, right? So
Yeah, your
fear is,
prefrontal cortex.
yeah, it's clouding your judgment. Add to this, what else is happening? The physiological effects of fear, right? It's so much about an immobilization process or an active get the hell out of the way process, but neither one of those processes really bothers about think, reason, decide, right? It's just
Mhm.
go or freeze.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're gonna be talking about how hope can help with that, and actually, as you're talking about it, something that's coming to mind is that sometimes when people think that they're being logical, reasonable, rational, but they're spinning a situation with a very cynical view or a pessimistic view, sometimes it's very much rational, logical, whatever, but sometimes a more cynical perspective comes from a feeling of hopelessness and feelings of fear, a fear of being let down, a fear of like facing negative emotions. And so there are times where we think that we're in our logical brain, but really speaking about logic from our fear activated brain.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like someone who's saying I'm being really pragmatic and prudent and weighing all the options, but actually because the fear is there underneath it, they're only weighing the options that could go wrong, and it's thereby freezing them or causing them to not think
Yep.
clearly. Yeah,
Yeah.
like absolutely. It's so true. And so we this happens to me too. Like our minds are tricky. The parts of our brain, they're not trying to be tricky to to be against us. They're trying to be tricky because they know that there's multiple parts in there vying for different things, right? Like the part of me that wants to go for the promotion, the part of me that doesn't want to. And they're
Yeah.
trying all of these different aspects of my being are trying to protect in some way, and yet they don't know what's best. And so they're they're operating in fear, trying to protect, right? But we want to be able to move forward in the value direction that we want to go in. So we introduce hope to those aspects even.
Mhm. So something that we talked about before we hopped on was in coaching, there's a concept called the 4 categories of experience, which basically are you have your circumstance or whatever is happening in your life, the reality of the situation, then you have your thoughts, however your interpretation is to that circumstance, the feelings that come from those thoughts, and the actions that result when you're in some sort of feeling state. And when we're in a place of fear, we're more likely to either, freeze, procrastinate, not be able to move forward, overthink, things like that, or potentially, panic. And when we bring hope into the equation, hope being a set of beliefs and in some ways a feeling, it
Mm-hmm.
can positively impact the outcome of a situation. So rather than me freezing and avoiding something that makes me afraid, if I can get in touch with feelings of hope or beliefs that something is possible for me, I'm going to be more likely to A, feel positively about it, and B, be able to take action towards creating whatever it is I'm hopeful could exist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so the 4 categories of human experience. This is the journey through which your fear goes also, right? Your a circumstance shows up to cause you to be afraid. Then you have thoughts about it, then feelings about it, then you take actions based on it, which then causes your next set of circumstances. So it's a loop, right? The 4 categories of human experience are just that's the loop of your life unfolding. That's how we unfold through life. And when fear is in that loop, it causes the loop to continue to be laced with fear that way. So when we introduce hope into the journey, we're introducing hope through that whole journey, which is this is something Mo and I were talking about a little bit right before we got on. And like it's to the notion of why sometimes people are hesitant to hope, right? Because they're like, why would I allow myself that pleasant feeling of hope when I don't
Mhm.
believe for a second that this thing is possible, right? So you don't want to introduce hope only as an emotion. Like hope is beyond an emotion. It's also just not a cognition. It's a dynamic perspective that is interlocking between your thoughts, your emotions, and your sense of the world, right? Your greater sense of things. And that when hope is allowed to be cultivated in that whole system, it then also permeates your actions and then begins to permeate your next set of circumstances because those circumstances are the result of your hopeful actions, even hopeful actions taken while terrified, right? Because hope doesn't displace fear, it gives you room to act while in fear.
So I feel like we're talking about this very conceptually, and I think for it to make sense, we need to, like, talk about an example. Can you think of anything that
Well, yes. So
Okay,
so my I was watching a episode of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with my nephew this week, and
love it.
it yeah, and they're in this some kind of like chamber, and there's no way out. They're all stuck against they're in the room, and their little force field thing starts expanding from the middle of the room, and as they throw things in it, they get vaporized, right? And so it's like they realize they can't touch this force field, but it just starts expanding and expanding, and so they're getting less and less and less space to be, right? And
Yeah.
basically they're all about to be crushed. And so in this episode, I'm watching it, and as I'm watching it while in the midst of doing this type of research back and forth, right? And so I'm thinking about it in these terms, and I'm like, there is every reason for these Ninja Turtles to be in total despair in this moment. Like, I mean, aside from it
Mhm.
being a kid's cartoon where nobody ever dies, like besides for that, they should be in total despair. I mean, it was looking bleak, but the
Yeah.
turtles remained hopeful, but not passive. Their hope was fuel that had them constantly looking for a way to make progress, right? Like their dialogue was
Mhm.
about, can you try this? Can you try that? Can you reach for that? So they wouldn't have even been trying to get out had they decided it was hopeless. They would have just been like, okay, well, let me make peace with my creator until the force field gets me or whatever, right? Like that.
And
It's
just
hopeless.
start crying, start
Yeah, right. It's hopeless.
resigning
So
yourself.
you give up resignation, right? That results instead, they were hopeful. And what the hope caused was a, a, a total journey through their thoughts, emotions, sensations of the world, and then into their action steps. Of course, because it's a kid's cartoon, their action steps led to total freedom, peace, harmony, and the good guys won and the bad guys are wrong. And it was
Mhm.
awesome, right? But it couldn't have ended that way had there not been hope. But
Yeah.
hope is in action, it fuels action. That's the key here. So it doesn't mean progress, because progress is like culture's idea of progress, right? We have like a person with a terminal diagnosis, for example. Like there may be a case, these are case by case. So in a terminal diagnosis, there may be a case where hoping for the cure and hoping for the cutting edge treatment and taking those action steps is actually the right way forward, and the person will know. But there's another situation where the case in that situation is like, I want to redirect my hope toward important and meaningful milestones, like getting to my grandchild's graduation, or
Yeah.
making amends with people in my life, or bringing meaningful closure to things that matter to me, right? And so it's like, we don't want to define progress in the way that is meaningless to us and then try to be hopeful of that. We have to have hope is directly related to the thing that you're hoping must be really motivating to you, like actually
Yeah.
to you, not to culture's idea of what should be for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked, last week about the man's search for meaning, where Viktor Frankl observed that people who were in concentration camps, those who had hope for being reconnected with somebody that they loved or had a reason to survive and they held on to that reason, those were the people who were more likely to survive a really horrible situation. And the minute that people lost that hope, they basically he was able to predict who was going to die next based on who had lost their hope.
Yeah, that is like staggering, and it's like a while to see how, I mean, how clear even externally to someone keenly observing the effects of hope can be, because those who hope tend to seek pathways forward toward the things for which they hope. But
Yeah.
optimism doesn't necessarily lead to that. And pessimism doesn't necessarily lead against that. There was a quote. Seneca is a Stoic philosopher, right? And he did these letters back in the day. And in letter 5, he wrote something like, uh, hope and fear are bound up with one another. The two of them march in unison, like a prisoner and the escort he is handcuffed to. And it makes sense, because hope and fear are both foundationally about uncertainty, which we touched on last week.
Yeah.
Because whatever you're hoping, there's a fear that it might not be fulfilled. That's why it's hope instead of certainty. And whenever you're afraid of, there's a hope that you might get out of it, right? And so
Mhm.
they're sort of tied in this way. Um, I read a blog by a fellow life coach. It's the focusedmindset.com. And she talked about a way to conceptualize this that I found to be really, really enlightening. And it was thinking of fear and hope as two beings personified and having a conversation within your brain, or within your sphere, right? And visualize fear as the unsolved problem, whether that's like,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I'm going to get promoted, or I think the world is ending from climate change, like whatever it is, that's the unsolved problem for you that you're afraid of in the moment. That's fear. And
Mhm.
then imagine hope as this beacon of potential solutions and possible positive outcomes and ways to move through it. And then you imagine fear and hope sort of having a conversation in your brain, not as enemies, but with the same goal. and then you see what unfolds in that conversation. And what tends to happen, according to the blog, and I have yet to try this, so I'll be trying it in the next few days, and if we remember, I'll report back. But it was talks about a mindset change from I can't possibly to I'll find a way, hopefully, which is a hugely different
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah, it feels different in the body, and I think that's like that's like the most important part is like if you feel differently in your body, it's going to affect the way you behave.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, because our body, every emotion we've ever felt has a corresponding sensation linked to it. When I say
Mhm.
that, if you're listening and you're like, what? No, it doesn't. That's okay. It just means that there's a practiced disconnect between your emotions and your body, which isn't your fault at all. It's the result of the culture that we've grown up in, which sort of says, oh, ignore the body signals and keep doing what we want, right? Keep getting the right answer, keep marching toward your dream goal, college, career, promotion, retirement, whatever. And so we're taught to not listen to the body. But the body is a huge indicator. And so when you notice your body relaxing in the midst of the thing you're afraid of, that's an evidence, a symptom, a reverse symptom that you're putting hope into the system, right? And it's
Mhm.
the most convincing symptom. So this is what's so interesting about having the emotion body connection, the mind body connection, is that there is this correspondence between emotions and sensations that we can largely ignore oftentimes when it's in the negative, right? Like we ignore gut feelings, we ignore the tense shoulders, we ignore the back pain, and we just march on. But when we land into an alignment of sorts just by happenstance and we feel that rush in our body, like we
Mhm.
almost can't ignore it, right? And so it's like we've been taught and practiced to ignore the negative signs, but the positive ones when they come are unignorable, right? And so then it's like we want to, so they're unignorable, but they're misinterpretable too. You could
Yeah.
have that rush and then go, oh, that's because of the donut I ate, so now I'm going to go have more of those. But no, it isn't. It's because whatever you were up to in that moment was something in alignment with your being, like prior to the donut, right? It's like we're saying, like, don't get caught up in your external circumstances and figure out where the sensations really arose from what were you up to that caused this flash of peace or joy,
Mhm.
and bring that awareness into the things that are causing you fear.
The thing that's coming to mind right now is I've been watching a show called Love Is Blind,
Mm,
and some people have been into it for a long time. I just got into it, and in the very first season, there's this couple, their names are Jessica and Mark, and I'm gonna try not to, like, spoil things here, but,
right.
um,
No spoilers.
Jessica is, like, very afraid of commitment and very afraid of, like, judgments that she'll receive from other people for being with Mark because they have, like, an age gap. They're, like, 10 years apart or something, and meanwhile, Mark is very hopeful that if Love is really blind, then they can work it out, and if she can, set aside some of, like, her fears, that they can make it work, and so they're, like, this perfect example of, like, hope and fear, but for Jessica, she's also a great example of how, like, people learn to not listen to their bodies, like,
Mm,
learn to not listen to their own discomfort because she's feeling discomfort clearly, like, when you look at her face and also her drinking habits, she's uncomfortable 100% of the time, and in a lot of fear, but she keeps saying that she's happy.
oh wow.
And she keeps so like all of her body language just says the complete opposite of how she actually feels or what you can see in her freaking face. Like it looks like she's lying through her teeth all the time about how she
Yeah.
feels. And if you watch the season, you'll know that truthfully she was not happy. But yeah, so it's just hope can reduce some of those negative impacts of fear, but also if your fear is really strong, you can't just like shut the door on it and pretend that it's not there. If you don't listen to your body and aren't honest with yourself that fear is happening, then it's gonna give you some grief later down the road.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so that's so good that you said that, because I can see now as we're talking how by trying to explain about how to introduce hope, it can seem like in advocating for experiential avoidance, for avoiding
Yeah.
your fear, and it absolutely is not that. So it's in fact it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
In order to effectively introduce hope into the thought process, the four categories process that is now laced with fear, you must
Mhm.
understand the process. And so that means not avoiding the fear, right? So I came across a metaphor for this in another article that I read, and it was about they called it acknowledging the power of acknowledgement. And it was like they said, imagine being chased by a pursuer, and then in the midst of being chased, you turn and you say, "Can I help you?" Then the dynamic totally changes, right? Perhaps they're taken aback and then you can get the jump on them. Or perhaps they
Yeah.
see that you're not that scared and they're like, it's no fun chasing you. You don't even care, right? So who knows what, it depends on the circumstances, right? But this idea is like you turn and you face the fear. You could,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be confrontational, but it's literally not running. It's the opposite of running. It's going, can I help you? Literally,
Yeah.
and with genuineness. Can I? What is it?
Yeah.
What are we afraid of? What actually, let's play out the worst case scenarios, knowing that we're
Yeah.
going to come with hopefulness. Like that's why we turn to face it, in order to say, actually, I'm going to hear you out, but there's hope, right? it's
Yeah.
it's a strategy that cultivates hope. So this is the thing. As you hear this, if you're anything like me, you're going to want to go right to the thing that you fear the most and go, oh, great,
Mhm.
here's the solution. Can I help you? Don't. Okay. That is
Yeah.
not how this works, because what I'm describing here is not a magic potion. It's an internal muscle. And if it was a magic potion, you could take it right to your biggest fear and pour it on there and it would work. You could just turn and face it and
Mhm.
ask, can I help you? And you would not have any more fear. But it's not that, it's a muscle. And because it's a muscle, it needs to be practiced. And so the way you practice it is you start off small, on really small fears, like little teeny tiny things. And you go, can I help you? And you're practicing your face your fear muscle on the little inconsequential things that for some reason have always dogged you. But now you're realizing as you hear this, oh, I'm in a different place in my life. There's a whole bunch of fears that are nonsense to me now. I'm going to look at those and do this exercise
Yeah.
on those, right? And that's
So,
how you practice, so that when
so you're
you
saying
go ahead.
when you experience fear or anxiety that's connected to a fear and you notice it, rather than avoiding it, trying to push it down or suppress it, you ask yourself, like, "What am I feeling? What needs do I have? How
Mm-hmm.
can I help you?" Like,
Yeah.
turning towards it rather than away so that it can be expressed, be felt, not in a way that, like, takes over, anxiety-wise, which is what happens essentially when you suppress your fear for long enough. That's how people get panic attacks.
Bingo.
It's because you have a buildup of suppressed fear. If
Yeah.
you face it, it feels terrifying, but if you face it, it will start to loosen
Like a pressure
and
valve.
start to dissipate. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm also saying, if you have big fears and you have coping strategies that have been working, don't necessarily take what I'm saying and go right to the big fear with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
First, go to some small and medium fears so you can prove to yourself it works, so you can see that this is happening for you, right?
Yeah.
And then start going to your bigger fears and facing them. Yeah. And like, you don't have to delay. It doesn't have to be a process that takes years, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, you know, do things that ensure your victory, because there is no rush. You're not behind, you're not broken, right? That I'm saying all this because I'm projecting, so I'm speaking for myself. Like, I
Mhm.
tend to rush. I tend to say, oh, I'm broken, I should be fixed. None of that's true. You have your own inherent wisdom and you're eternal, so you have all the time
Yeah.
in the world to do this. And so it's about taking it easy. Like, the fear is already making it hard. And so the process of introducing hope is not meant to be a thing you can use to club yourself and make it hard, right? It's
True.
only meant to add ease. Yeah. So like stories, right? To ground this down. So I have, I have a couple different things. So like one is, I've touched on this before, but like I was held up at gunpoint, and like in an alleyway. And like I told this story. So in really brief, what happened was the guy said, "Get down on the ground." He had the gun pointed in my face. And I just had this knowing in me that if I obey him and get down on the ground, he will shoot me and execute me. That's how I felt. I was convinced of it. And so I didn't know what to do, but I wasn't optimistic that I was going to get out of this at all, but I hadn't lost hope. And that hope prompted action. And the action was what every sarcastic gay boy does best. I rolled my eyes at him. And in so doing, he went, like, I rolled my eyes as if to say, really? Like, really get down on the ground? You're such a cliche. It was that kind of eye roll, right? Like a, oh, down on the ground, please. Like, you're such a lame thug. Like it was the most insulting, like dripping with like RuPaul scorn I could possibly muster at this thug. And he was taken aback, like much like the
Yeah.
chasing, can I help you example, right? And
Yeah, it surprises people.
he waved his gun at me and he went, fine, just run away then. And so I turned and I ran, and I am here to tell the tale. And that is because, while not optimistic at all, somewhere in me there was hope that prompted action.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's also an example
Like,
of why it's so worth it to take things like this and go to your mental, emotional, sensational gym, because it was my practice of having a hopeful mindset that allowed me to not crumble in despair in that moment, right? Like this is exactly what I mean. Like that would not have happened for me if that was the first thing I went to try to practice this on. I would
yeah.
have been like, "Can I help you?" And he would have been like, "Actually, boom," right? Like so,
Yeah.
so it's a
Who
nuanced
knows?
thing here, but yeah.
Yeah, who knows
um,
what would have happened, but I'm glad that you're here to tell the tale.
yes, thank
And
you.
I do think that, like, just unexpected response just had to throw off, like, the balance of the energy in that moment, like, he was expecting you to do one thing, and then when you
Hmm.
did something different, it was like, "Oh, wait, what?" Like, it had to pull him out of, like, whatever
Yeah,
moment and determination he was in, which gave you some time.
totally. And it wasn't like there was no strategy in this. Like it was all
No.
instantaneous, right? Like it was knee
Yeah.
jerk. And that's obviously a very drastic example. And like so my other example is like my career, like my change. Like I made a drastic change in life direction when I was 40. Like I had been in LA pursuing screenwriting, and then I pivoted off that into medical marijuana. And I left a successful career running a medical marijuana dispensary at the age of 40 because it wasn't making me happy. And so I pivoted back to pursuing my childhood dreams, and I came back home and I went to film school and I wrote screenplays, and I've won some little awards here and there. But the pandemic shut all that down, and in the midst of that, I then discovered life coaching and Martha Beck and what she was up to. And now I've got this thing here that I'm juggling with those two things, both alive and kicking. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because if I'm really truthful, really, really, really gut level honest, I'm not necessarily actually optimistic about the exact outcome of my showbiz goals in terms of
Yeah.
fame and success. Like, will I have multiple TV shows and with spin-offs and a TV universe? That is my dream come true. Will that happen? I have no idea. And I'm not
Mhm.
actually optimistic in that sense, but I am
Yeah.
hopeful. So, and the
Mm.
reason I can say that is because the optimism would be placed on, it must be exactly what I think. And this is how it should turn out. I'm optimistic it will, and it's rigid, and then it would freeze me because optimism doesn't prompt action. But the
Yeah.
hopefulness is about something totally different. I am hopeful that just the pursuit of this dream will lead me to more enrichment, to more fulfillment, and it will be a blast along the way. And that
Yeah.
is proving true now as I do it this way. Like, I'm pursuing that childhood dream, but there's no pressure on it to ever be my income. And I'm having a lot of fun. So I'm hopeful
Which
that it will
is
lead to
a
this
great
big
life.
success, but I'm not optimistic. And that part doesn't actually matter anymore, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
and y
another, just to say a nuance between hope and optimism there, right? And like how they, one greases the wheels of your forward motion, and one actually pours ice and rust and all this other. That's toxic positivity then.
agreed.
Yeah.
Any other comments about hope as an antidote to fear before we close off for today?
Yeah. One last thing I'll say is as a way to, if anyone's hearing this and they're like, well, this is all well and good. Of course, I am now well versed on the importance of hope, and yet I feel hopeless. So thank you, fuck you, right? If that's where you're at right now, then I get it. And Here's a tiny turtle steppy type exercise for you folks, which is progress parties. It's just reflecting on past victories. So you don't have to manufacture hope. You don't have to conjure hope. That won't work. That would again be avoidance of some kind, right? You want to cultivate hope. And so the way you do that is, this is one of many methods, but this is the one I want to share, which is reflecting on past victories, reflecting on times when you have grown into something. So you're reflecting on your capacity for growth and your capacity for change. And as you reflect on that, instead of being, fear often immerses us in the future and the outcomes and the possibilities, and that's usually negative with fear, right? This is now you're withdrawing your attention from the future altogether and instead putting your attention on the past, but a very specific strain from the past, the strain from the past that led you from victory to victory to victory to victory to where you are now. So you're beginning to tell yourself a different conceptualized story by highlighting all the places where you have overcome something. And you start small. If as you're hearing this, you're like, I don't have any, then go back to kindergarten and start with the fact that you made it from kindergarten to first grade. And I don't mean this pejoratively. I mean genuinely, like, give yourself the grace to celebrate the fact that you have survived everything that life has ever thrown at you up to now. And you will survive even this condescending exercise that I've just delivered to you also.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Brian. I think that's a good place to wrap up today.
Right on. So yes, thank you so much, everybody. We will be back again next week on Thursday, again, continuing the trend at 9 a.m. Eastern. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. We love you all. Thank you. Sorry, Instagram.